The frigid air of December whipped through the streets of Chicago, slicing through coats and scarves as though the layers were paper thin. The city was alive with its usual cacophony of honking horns and hurried footsteps. Yet, amidst the chaos, there was a peculiar stillness in the air, a whisper of something about to happen. On a bustling corner near Michigan Avenue, a man staggered and fell to the icy pavement. His coat was threadbare, his shoes so worn that they barely clung to his feet. He clutched his chest, his pale face contorted in pain, while his trembling hands reached out as though grasping for an invisible lifeline. The crowd, as always, was a tapestry of indifference. Some paused, their gazes flickering with fleeting concern before they continued on their way. Others didn't stop at all, their eyes glued to their phones, capturing the moment for their social feeds, a tragedy reduced to a spectacle. But amidst the sea of apathy, a black limousine rolled to a slow stop at the curb. Its polished exterior gleamed against the gray of the Chicago winter, a sharp contrast to the world it had momentarily intruded upon. Inside the car, Barron Trump, tall, striking and dressed impeccably in a tailored wool coat, peered out the window. His blue eyes, often described as piercing, now reflected a rare softness as he took in the scene. Barron was used to the cold efficiency of his life, the calculated decisions and strategic moves that defined him as his father's heir. Yet something about the man on the ground gnawed at him. "Stop the car," Barron said, his voice cutting through the silence inside the vehicle. The driver hesitated, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Sir, we're already late for." "I said stop the car," Barron repeated, his tone firm but not harsh. The vehicle came to a halt. Barron stepped out, the bite of the wind immediately stinging his face. He approached the man, his polished leather shoes crunching against the icy sidewalk. For a moment Barron hesitated, as though the sheer gravity of the situation had caught him off guard. "Are you okay, sir?" Barron asked, kneeling beside the man. His voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of urgency. The man's eyes fluttered open, his lips moving faintly. "Help me," he rasped, his breath shallow and labored. Barron's chest tightened. There was no time to lose. He turned to his driver, who had stepped out of the car to observe. "Call 911, Barron barked. His usual composed demeanor cracked, revealing a man not used to feeling powerless. "Yes, sir," the driver replied, fumbling for his phone. As Barron crouched beside the man, he placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "You're going to be okay," he said, though he wasn't sure if the words were more for the man or for himself. The crowd, now curious, began to murmur. "Why is he helping?" someone whispered. "That's Barron Trump," another said. Phones were raised, capturing the scene as though it were another performance in the theater of life. Barron ignored them all. His focus was solely on the man before him. He noticed a crumpled piece of paper slipping from the man's coat pocket. Without hesitation, Barron picked it up, his curiosity piqued. The note was written in shaky handwriting, the words trembling as much as the man himself. "To anyone who finds this," it read, "I'm sorry, I failed. Please take care of my daughter, Anna." The words struck Barron like a blow to the chest. He looked down at the man, who now seemed even more fragile, as though his very existence hung by a thread. Who was this man, and where was Anna? "You've got a daughter?" Barron asked gently, his voice softening. The man's eyes flickered open once more. "Anna," he whispered, tears welling up before spilling down his cheeks. "She's alone. Please, promise me." Barron swallowed hard, his throat tightening. This wasn't just about saving a stranger's life. This was about a child, a family, a world on the brink of collapse. He nodded, his voice resolute. "I promise. I'll take care of her." The wail of sirens broke through the frozen air, and paramedics rushed to the scene. Barron stood back as they worked, his gaze never leaving the man. As they lifted him onto the stretcher, the man's cracked voice managed one final plea. "Don't leave her." Barron followed as the paramedics loaded the man into the ambulance. He leaned in close and whispered, "I'll find her. You have my word." As the ambulance doors slammed shut, Barron looked down at the note in his hand. The weight of its words settled heavily on his heart. This wasn't just a chance encounter. It felt like fate had thrust him into something far greater than himself. "Follow that ambulance," Barron instructed his driver, his voice steady once more. The car eased into traffic, and Barron gazed out the window. His thoughts swirled like the snowflakes falling against the city's skyline. For years, the world had painted Barron as a symbol of privilege, a man defined by his father's empire. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Wealth, power, status, they were meaningless in the face of a simple, human plea for help. As they approached the hospital, Barron's resolve solidified. He didn't know what awaited him, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to let this man's plea go unanswered. The hospital doors slid open, and the sharp smell of antiseptic stung Barron's senses. The warmth inside did little to ease the chill that had settled in his chest. He followed the stretcher down the hallway, his long strides keeping pace with the paramedics, who worked in seamless unison to stabilize the frail man. "Sir, you'll have to wait here," one of them said as they turned a corner into the emergency ward. The doors swung shut behind them, leaving Barron alone in a fluorescent-lit hallway. His breath fogged slightly in the crisp air, and for the first time in years he felt truly powerless. Barron sank into a chair in the waiting room, his hands resting on his knees. The crumpled note was still in his grip, the words etched into his mind, "Please take care of my daughter, Anna." He read the message again, as though looking for hidden meaning, something that would make this responsibility less immense. But the words remained the same: desperate, pleading, irrevocable. He leaned back and closed his eyes, trying to piece together what little he knew. Who was this man? And why had his life unraveled so catastrophically? The city outside offered no answers, just the distant hum of traffic and the occasional wail of another ambulance. Hours passed, each minute stretching longer than the last. Barron remained in the same chair, his polished shoes scuffing the linoleum floor as he shifted restlessly. He had no reason to stay, no connection to this man, except for a single note. But leaving felt unthinkable. Finally, the doors to the emergency ward opened, and a doctor stepped out, his expression measured but weary. "Mr. Trump?" the doctor asked, scanning the room. Barron stood, his tall frame nearly brushing the overhead light. "How is he?" "He's stable for now," the doctor replied. "But he's malnourished and severely exhausted. It's a miracle he made it this far." The doctor hesitated, then added, "Do you know him?" Barron shook his head. "Not really. I found him on the street." He held out the note. "But he has a daughter. Anna." He mentioned her. The doctor took the note, his brow furrowing as he read it. "He hasn't mentioned any family to us," he said. "It's possible he's been too weak to communicate fully. Do you have any idea where this Anna might be?" "No," Barron admitted, his voice tight. "But I'm going to find her." Barron left the hospital with a growing sense of purpose. The city lights blurred as he rode back to his apartment, his mind racing. He'd spent his life surrounded by opulence and convenience, never forced to confront the fragility of existence. But tonight everything felt different. He called his assistant, Olivia, as the car glided through the snow-dusted streets. "Olivia," he began, his voice steady despite the storm inside him, "I need you to find out everything you can about a man named Richard Smith. He's in critical condition at Mercy General. Start with public records, anything that can lead us to his family." There was a pause before Olivia replied, "Understood. I'll have something for you by morning." "Thank you," Barron said, hanging up. He stared out the window, the city's pulse reflected in the glass. Somewhere out there was a little girl named Anna, waiting for a father who might not come home. And for reasons he couldn't quite articulate, Barron felt compelled to make sure she wasn't waiting alone. The next day, Barron received a call from Olivia. Richard Smith has an address listed in a low-income housing complex on the south side, she informed him. No known relatives in the immediate area. Do you want me to send someone? No, Barron replied firmly. I'll go myself. It wasn't a decision he made lightly. The South Side wasn't a place he frequented, and he knew his presence would raise questions. But this wasn't about appearances. It was about a promise he had made to a dying man. The housing complex was as bleak as Barron had imagined: peeling paint, broken windows, and a sense of quiet despair that hung in the air like smoke. He climbed the creaking stairs to the fourth floor, his polished shoes a jarring contrast to the worn linoleum beneath him. When he reached Richard Smith's apartment, he hesitated. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning him inside. He knocked softly. A small voice answered from within, tentative and trembling. Who is it? Barron's heart clenched. My name is Barron, he said gently. I'm a friend of your dad's. May I come in? The door opened just enough for a small face to peek out. A girl no older than 6 stood there, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear torn. Her wide brown eyes were filled with equal parts fear and hope. You're Anna, Barron asked, crouching slightly to meet her gaze. She nodded, her lips quivering. Where's Daddy? Barron hesitated, choosing his words carefully. He's in the hospital, he said softly. But he's going to be okay. He asked me to check on you. Anna stepped back, allowing him inside. The apartment was cold and sparsely furnished, with only a threadbare couch and a small table cluttered with papers. The refrigerator hummed faintly in the corner, its contents likely as empty as the room. Barron took it all in, the weight of what he'd stepped into pressing down on him. This wasn't just about finding Anna, it was about saving her. Are you hungry? Barron asked, his voice breaking the silence. Anna hesitated, then nodded. But Daddy says we can't afford pizza. Barron smiled gently. Well, today's special. Let's get pizza. For the first time, a small smile crept across Anna's face. It was shy, hesitant, as though she didn't quite believe happiness could find her here. But it was enough to make Barron's chest tighten with emotion. They ate sitting on the floor, the pizza box spread between them. Anna giggled as Barron wiped a smudge of sauce from her cheek, her laughter filling the room with a warmth that had long been missing. For a moment, the stark reality of their situation melted away, replaced by something simpler, something pure. Do you like school? Barron asked, hoping to learn more about her. Anna nodded, her eyes lighting up. I like to draw. Daddy says I'm really good. I bet you are, Barron replied. You'll have to show me some of your drawings. Anna beamed, the kind of smile that made Barron realize just how much she had been holding back. He couldn't imagine what it had taken for a child so young to endure so much. That night, as Anna drifted off to sleep clutching her rabbit, Barron sat on the worn-out couch, his mind restless. He couldn't walk away. Not after seeing the world through Anna's eyes, not after hearing her laugh. He made a silent vow. This wasn't going to be temporary. He would fight for Anna, for Richard, for the life they both deserved. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that the road ahead would be far more dangerous than he'd anticipated. Barron woke to the soft creak of the apartment's front door. For a moment he froze, his heart thudding in his chest. The early morning light was just beginning to filter through the cracked blinds, casting faint patterns on the worn carpet. He stood quickly, his sharp instincts telling him something was off. As he approached the door, he saw Anna peeking through the small gap she'd opened. She clutched her stuffed rabbit tightly in one hand, her small frame dwarfed by the oversized hoodie she wore. What are you doing? Anna, Barron asked softly, kneeling beside her. Anna looked up at him, her big brown eyes filled with worry. I heard a noise outside, she whispered. I thought it might be Daddy. Barron's chest ached. He gently closed the door and locked it, his hand lingering on the cold metal for a moment. Your dad's still at the hospital, he said. but we'll go visit him soon, okay?" Anna nodded, her lip trembling. "I miss him." "I know," Barron replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But he's getting stronger every day. You'll see him again soon." Later that morning, Barron called Olivia to update her on the situation. "I'm staying here for now," he said, pacing the small kitchen. "Anna can't be left alone, and her father. Well, I don't know if he'll make it." Olivia's voice on the other end was calm but tinged with concern. "Barron, this is way beyond anything you've ever dealt with. Are you sure you're ready for this?" Barron glanced over at Anna, who was sitting cross-legged on the floor, carefully coloring in a picture she'd drawn. "I don't think it matters if I'm ready," he said quietly. "It's the right thing to do." Olivia was silent for a moment before replying, "If you need anything, resources, help, just let me know. You're not in this alone." "Thanks, Olivia," Barron said, hanging up. He placed his phone on the counter and took a deep breath. Alone or not, the responsibility weighed heavily on him. By mid-afternoon, Barron decided it was time to check on Richard. He bundled Anna in her coat and led her to the car waiting downstairs. She clutched his hand tightly as they walked, her trust in him both heartwarming and heartbreaking. When they arrived at the hospital, the antiseptic smell hit Barron like a wave of cold air. Anna hesitated as they approached the nurse's station, her small hand gripping his even tighter. "I'm here to see Richard Smith," Barron said to the nurse. "This is his daughter." The nurse gave them a sympathetic look and motioned for them to follow. As they entered Richard's room, Anna let out a soft gasp. Her father looked so fragile, his face pale against the stark white of the hospital bed. Tubes and wires surrounded him, a harsh reminder of how close he had come to the edge. "Daddy," Anna cried, running to his bedside. She climbed onto the chair next to him, her little hands reaching for his. Richard's eyes fluttered open at the sound of her voice. For a moment he seemed disoriented, but when his gaze settled on Anna, a weak smile broke across his face. "Anna," he rasped, his voice barely audible. Barron stayed by the door, giving them space. He watched as Anna talked to her father, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and relief. But it was Richard's expression that struck Barron the most, the way his eyes softened, the way his hand, though weak, clung to Anna's as though she were his lifeline. After a while, Richard motioned for Barron to come closer. Barron approached the bed, his tall frame towering over the frail man. "Thank you," Richard whispered, his voice strained, "for taking care of her." "You don't need to thank me," Barron replied, his tone firm but gentle. "She's an incredible kid. Anyone would have done the same." Richard shook his head weakly. "Not everyone would," he said. "People, they don't stop. They don't see." Barron looked down at Anna, who was now drawing on a piece of paper she'd pulled from her backpack. Her world was so small, so simple, yet so full of love and resilience. "Well," he said softly, "I saw her. And I'm not going anywhere." As the days passed, Barron became a fixture at the hospital. He split his time between caring for Anna and digging deeper into Richard's past. Something about the man's story didn't sit right with him. Why was he alone? Why had no one stepped in to help? Barron reached out to Olivia, who had been tirelessly searching for answers. "I found something," she told him during a late-night call. "Richard used to work for a private security contractor overseas. There's a history there, something big. But the records are sealed." "Sealed," Barron echoed, his brow furrowing. "Why?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Olivia replied. "But I'll tell you this, it's not just about bad luck. There's more to this story than we know." Barron hung up and stared at his phone, his mind racing. He glanced over at Anna, who was fast asleep on the couch, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Whatever Richard had been involved in, it was clear that it had left scars that were now shaping Anna's life. One evening, as Barron cleaned up the apartment, there was a knock at the door. He opened it cautiously, his instincts on high alert. A man in a leather jacket stood on the other side, his expression unreadable. "Can I help you?" Barron asked, his tone calm but firm. The man smirked. I'm looking for Richard Smith." "He's not here," Barron replied, his posture stiffening. The man stepped closer, lowering his voice. "When you see him, tell him time's up. No more hiding." Barron's jaw tightened. "I don't know who you are," he said, his voice cold, "but you're not welcome here." The man chuckled darkly. "You're playing a dangerous game, kid. Don't get in over your head." As the man walked away, Barron closed the door and leaned against it, his heart racing. He turned to see Anna peeking out from behind the couch, her eyes wide with fear. "Who was that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No one important," Barron lied, forcing a smile. "You don't need to worry." But inside, he was anything but calm. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and the picture they formed wasn't pretty. Whoever Richard had crossed, they weren't going to stop, and now they were coming for Anna too. That night as Anna slept, Barron made a decision. He wasn't going to wait for the danger to find them. He had to act and fast. Barron Trump, a man born into privilege and power, found himself in an unfamiliar and deeply emotional battle. The weight of Richard Smith's desperate plea and the innocent trust of little Anna forced him to confront a question he'd rarely asked himself: what kind of man am I truly meant to be? In the sterile confines of a hospital and the cold walls of a run-down apartment, Barron's world shifted from boardrooms and luxury to life or death decisions and selfless sacrifice. But the shadows of Richard's past began to creep closer. A mysterious man's menacing warning at the apartment door left Barron's mind racing. What was Richard hiding? And more importantly, how much danger was Anna in? As Barron sat by Anna's bedside, watching her clutch a torn stuffed rabbit, he couldn't shake the growing sense that their fight had only just begun. What would you do if the safety of an innocent child depended on uncovering dangerous truths? Would you risk it all to protect a life so fragile? Barron's resolve is clear, but the forces against him are dark, powerful, and unrelenting. What secrets lie buried in Richard's sealed past? Who is the man hunting them? And will Barron's promise to Anna and her father ultimately lead to salvation or tragedy? If you want to know what happens next, comment below and share your thoughts. Do you think Barron can shield Anna from the storm brewing around them? Or will his efforts uncover a truth too dangerous to handle? Let us know, and don't miss the next chapter in this gripping story of courage, compassion, and the fight for survival.